German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock has urged Mali's military to cut ties with Russian mercenaries. Baerbock made the comments yesterday during her visit to the conflict-torn Sahel nation. Her visit followed the European Union's decision to halt military training in the country, citing the presence of Russian mercenaries as one of the reasons behind the move. Mali's transitional government, which took power in a 2020 military coup, enlisted the help of private military contractors belonging to Russia's Wagner group to fight militants. The Wagner group, which is already under EU sanctions for human rights abuses, is accused of being responsible for killing civilians during a military operation which left hundreds dead.
Klar ist dabei, dass in dieser Situation, wo wir alles dafür tun müssen, nicht nur Mali, sondern den Sahel zu stabilisieren, der Sahel und vor allen Dingen Mali nur stabil sein kann, wenn Wahlen nicht immer wieder verschoben werden und vor allen Dingen mit Blick auf die Sicherheitssituation nicht mit russischen Akteuren zusammengearbeitet wird. Putin führt einen schweren und völkerrechtswidrigen Angriffskrieg gegenüber der Ukraine. Ich habe sehr deutlich unterstrichen, dass dieser Angriffskrieg ein Angriff auch auf uns Europäerinnen und Europäer ist. Und deswegen ist es für uns eine zentrale Frage, ob hier mit russischen Kräften gemeinsam eben die Streitkräfte ausgebildet und gestärkt werden.
And as expected, there was pushback. The army-dominated government has denied hiring Russian operatives. The country's Minister of Foreign Affairs says Bamako has a state-to-state relationship with Russia.
Je tiens à préciser que le Mali n'abrite pas de société de sécurité privée comme cela est allégué ici et là. Le Mali a une coopération d'État à État avec la Russie, qui est une coopération de long terme. Je crois qu'il ne faut pas aussi confondre les choses. Le Mali est un petit pays qui se bat pour sa survie. C'est un pays qui cherche à s'affirmer pour pouvoir assurer sa sécurité et aussi installer un processus démocratique ici.
Meanwhile, witnesses say Malian troops and white mercenaries were involved in the killing civilians in the militant-controlled town of Moura in March.
It was market day in the town of Moura when Malian troops, backed by white mercenaries, descended in helicopters and opened fire on bewildered residents. That's according to the accounts of eyewitnesses like stall owner Amadou. He saw soldiers fan out on the morning of March 27th and ran home, but was arrested hours later and taken to a riverbank on the outskirts of town. There, he said, thousands of men were sat with their hands tied. Over the next 4 days, he and 2 other witnesses describe how the men sat in the blazing sun with little food or water and watched as soldiers took groups to the edge of a mass grave and shot them.
They took 15 to 20 people. They lined them up about 100 meters from us. They made them kneel down and they shot them. It's distressing. It's unimaginable. It's hard to speak about it. I thank God I got out of it. A lot of my friends were killed there.
Reuters cannot independently verify their information or visit Moura, but the accounts bolster evidence gathered by Human Rights Watch. Last week, it alleged that Malian soldiers, assisted by suspected Russians, killed around 300 civilians in Moura. The town of 10,000 people is under the control of a militant group linked to Al-Qaeda. Mali's army says it killed 203 insurgents there during a military operation. It denies reports of executions and has not responded to a request for comment. Wagner Group, a Russian private military contractor that recently started working with the Malian army, could not be reached for comment. But the reports raise concerns over the presence of Wagner. Western powers strongly opposed the group's intervention, warning that it could stoke violence. The United Nations has accused Wagner of killing civilians while working in Central African Republic. Russian officials have denied the reported abuses. The EU has imposed sanctions on Wagner, which it says works on the Kremlin's behalf, though Moscow denies ties. Mali's military police have opened an investigation, as has the United Nations, though the UN says it has not been granted access to Moura.
Right, following that disturbing report, let's unpack the developments in Mali further with David Otto, who's the director for Geneva Centre for Africa Security and Strategic Studies. He joins us now from London. David, thank you for your time this evening. West Africa, Mali in particular, has been rife with coups and military takeovers. What makes West Africa an appetizing place, if you will, for this sort of thing?
I think it's very difficult to pin down a one-factor dynamics in terms of the engagement of jihadist groups, within the continent, but specifically in West Africa. But I think if you want to be very precise, one would look back at the instability that was caused with the overthrow of the then Libyan President Muammar Gaddafi and his eventual assassination. That chaos that emerged from Libya opened up the doors, the corridors, so to speak, for jihadist groups to actually flow towards the Sahel, right down to Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger, spreading across towards the west part of Africa, which is Nigeria. But of course, we still have, situations that had benefited, jihadist groups to spread towards Africa, especially with the collapse of the so-called Islamic State. Many foreign fighters, who had left West Africa, were now kind of, going back to the continent to then, form jihadist groups that have eventually established themselves in locations in the Sahel, in countries like Mali, especially the triangle of Liptako-Goma, which, links to Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger Republic. So this has been ongoing. But, based on the economic the poverty level, the relative deprivation, as I prefer to call it, the weak governance of governed spaces within that area, this has been a fertile ground for jihadist groups, to take advantage of the weak governance as well, which of course we've seen with several military coups that are happening now in this region. So there are so many factors that have given a fertile and a soft ground for chaos and for jihadist groups, based from Al-Qaeda and ISIS to breed around this region.
Well, some of those that are trying to assist in dealing with the chaos are the European Union. And we know that the Germans, in particular, as part of the European Union, have been in Mali carrying out a training mission. How successful are these missions, in particular this training mission by the EU in Mali?
Mali has been a country that, has seen, what I call, multiple engagements from, both the EU. There is the EU mission in Mali. There's also Operation Takuba, which is a strictly European mission force, which also, of course, is also in Mali. Then, of course, you had the then French Operation Barkhane, which was launched around 2013. That was exclusively a French mission. You still have the G5 Sahel, and don't forget, you still have the United Nations mission in Mali. So there are several international organizations, so to speak, that are involved in the counterinsurgency operation. But what has been very clear in the past decade or so, speaking on the basis of someone who has just been in Mali and talking to all levels of people within the government, non-governmental organizations, the people in the streets, what you find is that there is this dissatisfaction that the expectation that people had, when these international organizations, came to assist them, has not been so far met, and there are now calls and cries for alternative engagements. So, while there has been a significant improvement in terms of what this the EU has brought in terms of soft approaches, but there is an increase in jihadist activities. The increase in terms
Sorry, David, you talk about the increase, and with that, obviously, is allegations that 300 civilians in Mali were shot or killed, certainly by forces attributed to, in fact, Wagner forces who are in allegiance with the Malian security forces. How much truth is there to that?
I think it's a very difficult accusations to make without proper investigation. And I think what is important is to allow the Malian government that has all the sovereignty of a country to then carry out an investigation to these accusations or allegations, so to speak. What the Malian authorities have made very clear, is that there is a bilateral security engagement with Russia. They have denied that there is any organization that exists in Mali such as Wagner. That has been a very strong position that the Western countries, France, EU, Germany have all made. That, of course, this is an engagement between Wagner, which is a private military company, and the Malian government. But, I would want to lean towards the argument of the Malian authorities. I mean, taking into consideration that there is a high level of skepticism because, Mali is now under the control of an interim administration with the military junta of Assimi Goïta being in charge. So there is that challenge that, in the absence of some kind of like a formal democracy, so to speak, then of course, there is that difficulty in siding with the government. But the people that I spoke to on ground...
David Otto, thank you for your time, and he's the director of Geneva Centre for Africa Security and Strategic Studies, and he was speaking to us from London.